Topic today is the chaos of the path. And I'm going to begin by saying all of our inner chaos is what is creating the outer chaos. Now I want you to say it out loud with me. You're going to stay muted, but I want you to say this out loud. My inner chaos is creating my outer chaos. Okay, then one more time, really loud. My inner chaos is creating my outer chaos. There. Okay, we're done. Ta-da! So, as impossible as that seems, when you go on the path, you have agreed to remove everything in you that's holding you back and causing fog and basically clouding up your Zoom connection with the divine, right? We all want to be in one-on-one contact with the ultimate, with Narayana, Guruji, whatever you consider as the absolute. But our past, our karma, our negative qualities, our insecurities are all clouding this Zoom connection. So what happens was when you take a step on the path, you have signaled that you want this screen cleared up. And what that means is everything has to be dragged out. And so the pressure that starts building on you will create chaos. And like Renata was saying just before we got started, she said she feels like she's been told by Guruji to go left and to go right at the same time. And so that's classic, right? That chaos is classic. And it's because we hear those messages through a filter, right? We hear these instructions. For some people, maybe they've got issues with men telling them what to do, right? Maybe they had a bad relationship with their father, with a teacher, and they don't accept someone telling them what to do. So when they're given instructions on the path, they go into panic because who's he, why is he telling me what to do? I don't trust men, right? All of those things inside of us that block clear messages are what have to be cleared. And so as Guruji said in one of his commentaries about Maya, Maya is what's where all this chaos lives. And he said, Maya is not an illusion, but rather a form of Devi. So Vaishnavas say Maya is delusion. Delusion, meaning we are tempted by the world thinking it will fulfill our desires. But Maya Devi is constantly working for our enlightenment. She will come and beat you with a stick until you cry for God. And I love that analogy. She will beat you with a stick until you get it. So thinking that, as long as that mind is going and judging everything you hear, so every instruction you're given, every direction you're given, every time you judge that and think you know better, Maya will beat you with a stick. because until we turn our mind off and let this purification keep happening, there's going to be chaos, right? And I saw it at its peak at the Kumbh Melas. People talk about how it's the biggest spiritual gathering in the world and 70 million people bathe in the Ganges to remove their karma. But what they don't mention is when your karma is being pulled out, it creates chaos within your body. And if you've ever been to a Kumbh Mela, you'll see there are medical stations set up everywhere for free. And it's because they know that when that purification is pushed on you, you're going to react to it. You'll get sick, projectile vomiting is very common at the Kumbh Mela. And both the Kumbh Melas I went to, I wound up in the hospital. So when karma is being removed, there is absolute chaos going on in your system. And that's why Guruji is stressing so much to hang on to the tools you've been given. So chanting the name of the Lord, Om Namo Narayana, Shri Vitala Giridhari Parabrahmane Namaha, because there's no avoiding what's happening to you, right? This chaos, it has got to happen. And so the best thing you can train yourself to do is to relax, chant, and let it process through you, right? Like, as this stuff is getting pulled out of you, you can get sick, you can think you're having a nervous breakdown. And if you will just keep going through it using the tools you've been given, it will end. And recently, I think it was in Sicily, on the bus, Guruji told this really sweet story about a man and his daughter were driving along the highway, and suddenly a rainstorm hit. And it was such a severe storm that everyone was pulling off to the side of the road. And the daughter got ready to pull off. And the father said, no, 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 keep driving. And she's like, but it's dangerous. He said, no, no, keep driving. And they drove out of the storm. So all of the cars that stopped were stuck in the storm, whereas they kept driving and they drove out of it. And that's pretty much what's happening on this path, is don't stop. Like, when things become chaotic and beyond your understanding, that's good, because the Guru is here to break our mind. He will do things that will make you just cry for help. And what he's saying is keep going, don't get stuck. Don't turn around and go back, say, I've had enough, these teachings aren't working for me, I'm leaving, I'm giving up. Keep going through the storm, right? Don't stop, keep moving forward, or else you'll be stuck in that chaos forever, right? Once that stuff is being removed from you, you can't stop it. So keep moving, keep doing your practice. And I know it may seem like nothing's happening. Like, when I first learned Kriya Yoga, it was in 1993. And I was a single mom with a toddler. And I thought, great, I found my safety net, a year of this and I'll be enlightened. And I'm sure you've all gone through that, where 10 years later, you're going, what the hell? Like, this was supposed to have fixed everything immediately. And 10 years later, it seems like I felt like I was on an earthquake fault line. Like, my life would not stop shaking. And luckily, by continuing, decade after decade, I've calmed down about the chaos. Like, now when I see it coming, that expression, be a witness, is very helpful. I've learned to watch it and not get emotionally involved in it, not judge it, just sort of go, oh, here we go, right? Another ride is happening. And to just keep witnessing it and not attaching to it, not thinking, how am I going to fix this? What do I do next? As Guruji says, focus on him, chant the divine names in your head, because the chaos will actually escalate the more you try to figure it out yourself, because chaos is the nature of the path. And I've got some quotes here of his. So in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verse 12, Guruji said, when you start on your spiritual path, you have a battle. You have a battle. You perceive all the negative qualities within you more strongly. Sometimes you'll awaken a quality which has never been there before. And so this is another thing that will create chaos. If all of a sudden you start being really judgmental or jealous, things that never happened to you before, it's because it's a very deep old thing that's being pulled out. So he says, sometimes you'll awaken a quality which has never been there before. But this is the purification one goes through. This is the Kurukshetra war that you go through. So just like in the Bhagavad Gita, it was good versus evil. we've got that in us too. So when that battle happens, you may feel like you're being shaken, to your very core, which is good. Like, it's good to have things shaken up like this. It says you uproot one by one all these negative qualities and transform them. You transform them until finally you have the love of God that stays. That is realization. To receive his grace, to manifest his love and beam his love. That is the duty of each human being, to love as your Father loves. You have to let go of your weakness. So a lot of this chaos, believe it or not, it does make you stronger. And I remember when I first started getting these sort of tests on me, when I was on the path, at first I'm like, why is this happening to me? How come everyone else has it easy and I don't? But what happens is when you keep shaking like this, your nervous system becomes very strong. And gurus talk about wanting to work with people with mature nervous systems. Because if you have the kind of nervous system that just whimpers and cries every time something intense happens, then the gurus have to back off, right? They can't, as Guruji says, unless you're ready, he can't give you the type of energy he wants to, because it'll make you snap. So anything in your life that has led up to you being stronger is actually helping you to be ready for when the intense energy of a guru hits. Because there are times when I've been around him and I've just blacked out. Like when he decides to download, it's immense. And I still know I'm getting like just a tiny speck of what he's capable of. But I know that 30 years ago, I couldn't have handled that. So when I look back on the chaos in my life, I realized that each step, every jerk of a boss, right? Every time I couldn't pay the rent, every test that came that shook me actually made me stronger, so that when big energy hits, it doesn't upset me, right? I'm not afraid, I don't run, I just know how to hunker down and take it. I remember the first time I had Guruji's hot sauce test. I don't know how many of you have been around when he starts handing out hot sauce, but the one he was using when I was there, it was 2019, and it was called Mad Dog hot sauce, and it's made from the hottest chilies on the planet. And he was sitting at the Bajan Cafe outside, and he had pastries, and he was cutting little pieces of pastry and putting this hot sauce on it. And I was watching him hand them to people, and they'd take a bite and they'd go throw up in the bushes, or they'd run to the bathroom, or they'd turn bright red, and tears would start streaming down their face because it's a brutally hot sauce. But he uses it to remove karma. So when he's doing this procedure at the cafe, he's triggering a massive release inside of you. And thank God I went through all of those Kumbh Melas and tests in India, because he waved me over and he said, have you ever had this? I said, no. So he said, do you want it mild or strong? And I said, whatever you give. And so he got his pastry and he's like, what's this layer of hot sauce on this pastry? And I bit into it, and it was like my soul was spinning this way and my head was spinning this way. Like the effect was amazing. But I just kept breathing and chanting, and I went and sat down, and people were staring at me to see what was going to happen to me. And I just kept chewing it, mixing saliva, chewing it. Things are exploding. And 5 minutes later, I was fine. And no one could believe it. They were sure I was going to bail and run away. But it did its job, and then it just settled. And I thought, wow, like all of those decades paid off. And so when the main group left, he looked over at me and he went, so Swamini, how was your hot sauce? And I went, rah, like this. I said, I feel like Narsimha. And he went, come get another one. And everyone just burst out laughing. And I went over and he gave me another one. And this one, when I put in, there was no effect at all. It was just like eating a pastry. And someone said it was because I was in shock, which could have been the case too. But it was interesting that it didn't have the effect on me that it did on others. And I know it's because of all the crap I went through previously. So everything that happens to you that shakes you or upsets you, by just diligently going forward and going through it, it strengthens you. It makes you stronger, and it makes you more able to handle spiritual energy, because spiritual energy is not what we think it is. It goes into your system and it explodes, right? So you have to be ready for that. Now, let's. When asked why God tests us so much, Guruji said, God knows that if he gives us luxurious things, we will forget about him. And by the same token, until we are exhausted with the outside world, he can't come to us. As long as bright, shiny things attract us, he can't help us. Okay, so that creates chaos as well. If you're trying to hang on to those bright, shiny things, and he's trying to rip them away from you, you're going to be in chaos, right? You have to know what to let go of. You have to know when he is pulling something away from you for your own good. And I remember one of my first teachers on the path, he just was running meditations here in Calgary. And I told him that I, was doing Kriya Yoga from Yogananda. And he got so upset. He said, my father started following Yogananda and he lost his fortune. And as soon as he stopped doing Kriya Yoga, he got his money back. And then he started following Yogananda again and he lost everything again. And so he walked away from the path because the path kept taking away his luxury. And, that's what Guruji is saying is luxury makes you forget about God. And so sometimes that has to be removed from you. And if you have the grace of being able to have things around you without being attached to them, like that's the key. You can have as much, as comfortable a lifestyle as you want. Just understand he's given it to you and don't cling to it, because sometimes he might be removing something from you because of something that's coming. Maybe he's all of a sudden your house is disappearing. Maybe it's because you have to get out of that area to be safe, right? We don't know the long game that he's playing. And a lot of times he may have your job abruptly end, have something go what you think is horribly wrong, but it's because he's redirecting you to go the direction where the best is going to happen for you. And in ancient India, I remember hearing this is before lawyers and lawsuits existed. And in ancient India, if a student wasn't getting the point and not shifting the way the teacher wanted them to, the teacher would break a clay pot over their head. So just, if someone's just being belligerent and stuck, and they would just smash a pot on their head, and it would give them a eureka moment. And I know I've had accidents happen to me where I could tell I was just in a weird loop, and then I'd run into a cupboard or trip and fall down the stairs, and that abrupt pain would shift me out of whatever cycle I was stuck in. So that's another thing that can happen to you, is you might have all of a sudden a weird accident happen, and it could be because you're stuck. You're not heading down the right path. You're not looking at what's in front of you. And the other thing that accidents do too, injuries, is it's a way that gurus remove karma from you. So there's stories of Babaji burning the hand of a devotee, and when everyone asked why, he said his karma was to die a violent death, and by just burning his hand, they had paid the karmic debt, but he only had to pay a small bit because the guru was taking care of him. And I know when I was in India, After yoga one morning, I was walking back to the dorm and I twisted my ankle and fell. And I played sports for years. I played basketball and I've rolled my ankle a million times. So I thought I would just walk it off and I'd be fine. And that's not what happened. I started shaking and crying and I almost got hysterical. And luckily the people at the ashram knew exactly what was happening. They said, you're having a violent death removed. Like whenever you overreact to an injury, it's a sign that some karma is being pulled out of you. And it happens under the guidance of gurus. I don't believe this happens if you're just a layman having injuries. You know, those are just injuries. But if you're under the care of a guru, you may have an injury that creates a really strong reaction in you. And that shows that the need for a violent death has been removed from your system. So I remember when I hurt my ankle, I ended up breaking my foot, actually, in India. And then within a week, it was healed. Like the doctors lost their minds because they couldn't figure out, the cast started dissolving. And so I had to go back to the doctor and he said, that cast has to stay on for a month. We're going to put on another one. And I said, my foot's healed, I can tell. And they're like, no way, you saw the x-ray. And I said, it's healed. So they cut this disintegrating cast off and yanked my foot around to show me how much pain I was in, and I wasn't. So they got the x-ray to show me how badly broken my foot was, and the x-ray was clear. So the evidence had been cleared off the x-ray and my foot was healed. And the doctors were, well, why would we put a cast on a perfectly good foot? And I just ran out of there before they could change their minds and put another cast on. But I remember that week, there must have been 10 of us at the ashram with broken feet, with casts. So these events may seem chaotic to an outsider, but if you understand what the path is doing, especially that the path is clearing karma for you, then sometimes there's a small price to pay instead of having to go through a violent death. Now, I had another quote here of Guruji's. So in the Sicily pilgrimage, Guruji said an interesting thing. He said, the secret of waiting for God is everything. He said, every duty that is allocated to one is very important and it contributes to the advancement of one towards liberation. Every duty is given as a test to see whether you are ready for something greater or not. If you are not ready, why should God give you realization? Why should God give you liberation? If you can't handle what he's given you in your daily life and you try to run away from it, forget about liberation. And so that comes right down to, I remember when I first moved back from California to Canada with my son, and I was just working these weird temp jobs, like just weird, mundane clerk temp jobs. And I thought, really, this is my life now? Like after all these adventures, this is my life. And it was a very mundane existence for years, right? And I realized that my Dharma was to raise my son, right? His father had died. It was just the two of us. And I know a lot of moms are stuck in that place right now where all you are is a mom. Like you cook and you clean and you're up to your eyeballs in dirty laundry and your life just seems, right? Like this is it. But it's amazing the endurance that gives you and the skills it gives you. And when my son was grown and I renounced everything and became a sannyas in India, it amazed me how much I could handle in the ashram that younger kids couldn't, because they weren't used to being woken up at 2 a.m. for like a sudden event, because gurus keep you off balance. And which mom isn't used to being woken up at 2 a.m. to the smell of poopy diapers? And I can see you waving there. Like there's something about having endured the outer world that makes you incredibly strong and incredibly capable to handle this path. So even if you just think you know, the jobs and the life and the chores aren't spiritual. It is your Dharma. And Dharma is just as important as, you know, traveling with Guruji and having fun vacations with him, because your endurance and your stability is so strong, and you don't know what his long game is. Like, I think the most profound example for me is what's happening right now. I'm back, I've signed a contract with film producers, and I'm back making movies. And this was something I tried to do for 30 years and it didn't work. So Guruji was playing movies in my head 30 years ago, and I was writing them down, and everyone who read them went, these are the most amazing things we've ever read. And everyone who tried to make it lost their job or their company went out of business. Like, it got so bad that if I liked somebody, I was afraid to let them touch my script. I'm like, no, I'd love to make your movie. I'm like, no, you don't. I really like you. You don't want to touch this. So I was like typhoid Mary. Like, it was disastrous for people to get interested in my work. And so I finally, you know, after learning how to do it, I made a film. I did everything that I was being inspired to do, but I kept slamming into a wall, right? So all of these skills were being loaded into me and nothing ever happened. So I renounced everything, ripped the scripts up, threw everything away, and went to India. And people who'd been trying to produce my work were in shock. They just couldn't believe that I had just given up. And then, you know, I get back to Canada, meet Guruji, and the second day I was with him, he took me to the movies. And I was in shock, and he said, how many gurus have taken you to the movies? And I said, none, but I know how to do this. Let's make movies. And 3 months later, he initiated me as a Swamini. And our last night sitting in the temple together, he said, so what happens with your films? And I said, nothing, nobody cared. And he said, do it again, it'll sell this time. And that's when it just exploded in my head. I thought, you stopped it from happening. Like, he needed to make me a Swamini so that I wouldn't be attached to the fruits of my actions, right? He needed me to be non-attached so that I could do the work without it being life and death, which is what it had been, right? In Hollywood, it was just, I was gonna die if I didn't get a film deal. And it was an emotional roller coaster, right? It was nightmarish trying to break into that industry. And then now with Guruji's blessing, unbelievable people are just showing up. Like, the first film that we're working on is a science fiction piece about aliens being our ancestors. So my hero is part alien, part First Nations, part white. And I've got the First Nations director showed up. She loves it. Her son is exactly the guy I pictured when I was writing it 30 years ago. Except when I was writing it, he hadn't been born yet. So it's the synchronicity that's happening now is extreme, but it was 30 years of chaos before this, because I was attached to the desires, the emotions, right? I was attached to all the wrong things. And now that I'm attached to Guruji, like, anything that happens, it's like a free ride, right? It's just joy now. And we even had a meeting where everyone was sliding into, we're Zoom meetings, and everyone was sliding into Hollywood mode, which I used to endure before. And everyone was starting to get that truthiness going, where they weren't quite telling the truth, right? They were sort of sliding around. And I felt Guruji just roar through me. And I said, I've taken a vow of truthfulness. And if this isn't based on truth, it's over. This is done. And everyone was so shocked, because I'd been this sweet Swami, right? I just got along with everybody, and I was smiling. And then I just blew. And they wanted to skid around the rules for First Nations people. And I was like, we have, with everything that's happening, I was like, we have to honor these people. We're bringing in consultants to make sure anything we do connected with their culture is right? We can't just pretend. We're not going to have Hollywood Indians in this, as they say. And everybody snapped out of it. And the next meeting we had was at a higher level, right? So it made me unafraid of standing up for myself, which before, when I was in Hollywood, I was afraid to. I thought the deal won't happen if I'm not, complacent and just get along with everybody. So what I realized was all the chaos from the past, not only was it, I didn't understand, I was just being trained for something that would happen later, right? So just because you're going through something right now and you can't see the point, you're like, why am I even learning this? Why? I don't need to know this. Like my last interview with Swami Kanjalochana, where Guruji all of a sudden threw him in the kitchen. And he's like, what? Why am I in the kitchen? I don't know how to cook. And now he is a famous cook with Bhakti Marga, right? His retreats are famous for his homemade bread on open fires, and right? But at the time, he was mad that he was being made to learn to cook in the kitchen. So that's the other thing, is to not judge what's happening to you on the path, right? You don't understand the long game. You don't understand what Guruji might want from you 30 years from now, right? It's so beyond our comprehension. And the way it was explained to me is, it's like the Guru can see that huge picture on the wall. He can see the whole picture, but we're standing right up close to the picture, which is our life, right? So we can only see the part of our life that's right in front of us, whereas the Guru is standing back and can see the whole thing. So to just remember that we haven't got the perspective to understand. And by fighting what's happening to you, you are going to create chaos. So that's why I said at the very start, our inner chaos is what's creating the outer chaos. And the more you learn to relax into what's happening to you, right? To picture it like you're watching a movie. And then it becomes hilarious, right? Like stuff that happens to me now, I find hysterical. Whereas before I was ready to, slash my wrists and drown in the bathtub. So you have to learn to react, to relax, right? It's the only survival tool. So I don't know if any of you signed up for Guru Connect. It's in your Bhakti ID. And so it's a monthly thing, but it's lovely because it's the talks that we didn't get to see from different pilgrimages. And he did one talk called Overcoming Obstacles. And he says, when you look back from a view of being cleansed, you will see that the guiding hand of the Guru was always there. It is visible. That's the most valuable lesson of life itself that the Guru has come to reveal. So in hindsight, I can see how he was planning all this stuff. When I was in the middle of it, I couldn't, right? So that's where the more you stop judging the situation and realize Guruji knows what's happening here, to just keep doing, that's a good question. I'll cover that in a sec. So if you can understand that he's driving the car, right? You don't know where you're going, he's driving the car. So that question just popped up. I saw that, Kanakadas. What's the best way to relax? So what I found is I go the opposite way from relaxing. If I'm just kind of winding up and trying to make myself go into a meditation, that often doesn't work for me. So I go the other way, and I'll like put on loud music and dance wildly, I'll to do something extreme. And I remember I was called to a hotel once. A place just south of here had a huge flood, and the whole town went underwater. So all these families were pushed into hotels, and a whole family would only get one room. So I was asked to come to this hotel and calm them down because they were ready to kill their young, right? Like all of these flood victims are trapped in a hotel with no end in sight. And so I got them all into the big ballroom, and I looked at them and I said, okay, let's yell. And I just started screaming and all the kids started screaming too. And the parents were standing there sort of off to the side, and I went up to this one guy and I said, if I was you, I'd be mad. I said, you better scream. And so he goes, ah, like this. And when I started throwing my arms around, and then I threw myself on the floor and I started pounding on the floor, and all the kids immediately, I remember this one girl with purple hair was like eyeballed out, and we were screaming at each other and we were pounding the floor. And then I said, everybody sit up and hum. So we all sat up and started oming. And then all of a sudden the kids started laughing, and we all started laughing. And we went outside and played with balloons, right? And I sat down with the adults later and I said, you might need to do this every day, right? Like, there is so much tension, you've lost everything. Like, let it go, because if you don't let it go, you're going to start hitting your kids, right? Like, that kind of extreme emotion has to get out. And so what I found is, if you physically exhaust yourself, right, that's a good way to then relax, because I couldn't go from high tension to, it just, right, the vibration was too much in my head. So, and I used to do that with my son, right? We would just start shrieking and running around, and we used to play this game. He hated it when we came to Canada, and I had to put him in daycare. And so we'd walk down the back alley to the daycare every morning, and it was dark. It was winter in Canada. And he was so miserable and so upset. And this one morning I found this big icy black ball that had fallen off a truck's bumper. In snow, you'll get huge blocks of ice dropping off of vehicles. And I went, oh, look, it's a hunk of crap. And he sort of perked up, and I went, it's the hunk of crap game. And we started kicking this ball of crap down the alley. And that became our ritual, right? So instead of him dreading daycare and school, and because in California, he came to work with me. So I homeschooled him. And so we just found a way to like exhaust him first thing in the morning, so that then the day wasn't so traumatizing to him. He'd take out all his frustrations kicking that hunk of crap ice down the alley. I remember one morning I kicked it, and I slid on black ice, and I went whoop, and I came down flat on my back, and he couldn't see me, and I'm lying, and I completely was winded, and the pain was unbelievable. And I hear this little voice go, Mom? And I was like, I just need to lie here for a second, sweetie. I didn't want him to know how hurt I was. I'll be okay. Just give me a minute. And I staggered back down the alley. But again, like, even that fall jolted me into awareness, right? Like, I'm sure that when I kicked that, I was probably busy fighting with my boss at work already, right? Like, I'm sure I was distracted when I was playing that game. So these jolts to our system can be incredibly healing if you just, like I said, accept what's happened to you, instead of going, why is Guruji mad at me? Like, why did I just run into the wall? He's not mad at you. He's just given you a huge hug and said, focus on me, like, pay attention to me, right? So there are no accidents. Everything that happens to us happens for a really clear reason. And even though it might hurt a bit, and I was going to finish by this one. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch the Navaratri, but it was just spectacular. So Durga, right? She inspires us to battle the demons on the path and be strong. She's always with us, along with Guruji and Babaji, right? So a lot of times, especially for the women, going into that warrior goddess mode can be an incredibly, not inspiring, but it can be incredibly activating for you, right? Calling you to action, because I know Some of us with our training, we back down, right? You'll find yourself shrink into yourself if you're in a situation you consider dangerous, or that you're not allowed to stand up for yourself, right? So instead of backing down and shrinking down into yourself, as Guruji says, falling into your weakness, if you picture Durga, right, and just like roar and whip those heads of demons around your head, it can be very empowering to remember that we weren't put here to be victims, right? So when the chaos hits, be a warrior, don't be a victim. Don't let that be the stance that you take. And the amazing gift that happened for me through all of this purification and all these processes where you don't think you're making any headway, that nothing is improving or helping. But what happened when Guruji landed in Vancouver and I met him for the first time, I immediately started hearing him in my head. And I had heard this happen to some people in India with the Guru there, and it never happened for me. But I was still going through a lot of chaos, a lot of purification, a lot of tests. And when I got booted out of India, I didn't think I'd made any progress until I met Guruji. And all of a sudden I just started hearing him, and I'd would be touring a temple and I'd turn around and look and he'd be staring right at me. So I knew he was speaking to me internally. And I thought, it's finally happened. Like finally the Zoom screen has been cleaned off and I'm actually hearing him. And I remember the last time when I was at the temple, and I knew I was getting ready to come back to Canada, and it could be for years. And I was just watching him. He had his back to us and he was facing Babaji. And in my head, I just said, beloved. And he turned around and he looked straight in my eyes. And I thought, that's enough, I'm good. Right? So this is the connection that is open to every single one of us. Right? So it's not about how close you are to him. Like he wants you to listen inside to him because he's always, always talking. And when you finally clear off your antenna, you'll start hearing him. And it's just the biggest gift you can possibly give yourself. So this is what's at the end of the chaos. Okay, this is what you're aiming for, is to clean yourself out to the point where everything he says, you just hear him. Okay. Okay, so I've talked enough. What do you guys?
Here's another question in the chat.
Okay.
How to handle it in the Sangha when Guruji is shaking and judgment and ego comes out? How to handle this feeling of being ashamed because of my errors?
So the first thing is, be so grateful that he has bothered to talk to you individually, right? Because that's huge. That shows extreme love if he will single you out to do that. But that's where you have to just keep breathing and chanting, okay? You have to disconnect from what's being said to you, because a lot of the Swamis, like when I interviewed Swami Keshava, he was so sweet because he said how often Guruji will yell at him about something that makes no sense, right? Something he didn't even do and he's being yelled at. And it's because it's not about what's being yelled at or what's being said. It's a blow to the head. It's him smashing that clay pot over your head. Okay, so he's throwing a massive bolt of lightning at you to create a shift. So if you can just learn to ignore what the event is, right? What's being said and is irrelevant, right? He could be yelling at you going, the sky is green. It doesn't matter what he's said. What he's done is he's taking the opportunity to cause a massive shift in you. And it's, if you just picture him breaking a clay pot over your head, he knows you're ready to transform and shift. And this is how he does it, right? And I went through the same thing too. When I first started getting yelled at by gurus, I was so hurt. I thought you liked me. I didn't do anything wrong. And it took years of, attacks before I finally just went, ah, right? And I would just focus on the energy that was hitting, because that's when I realized massive energy was hitting me and shifting me up. Okay, so it's like I say, you can almost ignore what's being said, because even the Swamis warn, don't respond, right? Like if he says something nonsensical, how dare you move that elephant, right? Instead of going, I didn't move your elephant. Like they say, never respond. Never try to reply to one of these things, because it's about him focusing energy on you. Okay? Don't get involved in the drama, because then it'll escalate, and then it'll turn into something it's not supposed to be, right? Then it'll turn into an ego battle, which will make him angry. If he sees your ego emerge, then you're lost. It's game over. But if you can understand that he's singled you out to create a shift, okay? And so what I've done is I breathe deeply, and it's like Om just sort of fills my head, just Om, right? So that whatever is coming at me can come at me without me trying to dodge it or dive under the table. Just let it hit. And then observe yourself over the next couple of days, because you'll see something happen, right? You might start vomiting. You might wind up with, stomach pain. And it's because he has initiated a purification, or a karmic debt is being removed, right? He might be yelling at you about something that you did 3 lifetimes ago, right? So if you can learn to accept it as the gift that it is, that he has bothered to seek you out, right, to shake you. Because some people will go through their whole lives wanting to be noticed by him. So it doesn't make sense to the Western minds. In India, I think they're more aware of it being part of the path of the training. But I know Westerners, it's like, he could have just asked me, could have just asked me nicely to stop doing that. But that's not how they work. And I realize it's because when we're spoken to nicely, we don't shift, right? It's like you need a velvet hammer. Is there another question there, Kenneth?
Yes, not a question. Is it possible to choose the middle way and balance between intuition and logic for someone on the bhakti path?
Well, actually, there's another option. My name, Pratibha, is mentioned in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And it says that above intellect and intuition is Pratibha. So what you do is, it's not about balancing in the middle, it's about rising above them both. And what happens is you get to a point where the answers just drop in, right? And so the answers will be logical, they will be inspired, they'll make perfect sense. Because when you think of it, the Vedas are all written intuitively. The Vedas were all brought in to the rishis, and they're the ultimate in science, logic, astronomy, right? They are the ultimate how-to manuals for the planet Earth. And they came in from a very high level. So what you're aiming for is to blend those two things and reach a state of pratibha. Well, let's close with an Om Shanti, shall we? Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om.